Welcome to Live from the Living Room. If you are watching this tonight live on Sunday, June 7th, unless you go to Akron Fairgrove Schools, sorry guys, you're done. You finished. You finished the school year even with the last few months being online, which is weird, but you handled it like a champ and now you get to enjoy your summer. You get the warm weather, the beach, cooking out, grilling, mosquitoes are terrible, but it's Michigan and we just got to deal with it. Seriously, my leg already got bit up. I've got like 15 mosquito bites and I would show you, but you don't want to see my leg. That's just kind of gross and that's weird. You don't want to see it, trust me. But you did it. It's summertime. Now we get to enjoy all of that. So a few updates with summer. First of all, if you've been a part of our Zoom groups, or even if you haven't, this week we're finally transitioning to doing no longer Zoom groups, but small groups in person, meeting outdoors in different locations. So if you don't know where your group is meeting this week, get in contact with your youth leader and they will let you know. But I'm so excited to actually get to finally see you guys in person. It's been way too long. And you might be wondering like, okay, yes, things are opening up and now we can do, I think it's like groups of 100 outside, which is pretty exciting. So with that, we're going to start spending some time figuring out exactly what youth ministry is going to look like this summer. To be real, to be fair, this is the time where we'd normally be on a break anyways. So we're going to take this time to figure out what our summers are going to look like exactly. And I hope to be sharing that with you in the next couple weeks. But for tonight, Live from the Living Room is going to look a little bit different. We do have a special guest, and I'm going to tell you more about him in a second. But what I want to take just a second to talk about, and what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about, is this idea of racism. If you have social media, or even if you don't, it's been impossible to miss over the last couple of weeks that our country is hurting right now. Our country is going through some crazy stuff, and I know there's a lot of different opinions and there's a lot of different perspectives. But I wanted to take a second with everything going on tonight to have a conversation about this. It can be easy. I looked at the stats. Cairo, I think, is like 95% white. Tuscola County is like 93% white. It's easy to be out here and think, oh, well, racism's dead. Racism's not an issue. But then we see these different things pop up. We see these incidents like we've had over the last couple of months. And we see the anger and the hurt and the pain that's expressed. And we just can't avoid the fact that racism, unfortunately, still is a thing in our country. But as I look at that, if I'm being completely honest, it breaks my heart, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Honestly, I'm not educated enough to talk to you guys about how we're going to stop racism. I don't have the background or the perspective to tell you what we can do to make this stop. So what I wanted to do tonight was take this platform, this Live from the Living Room platform, and bring on an old friend of mine, who actually does have a perspective, who has experience with this, and can have a conversation with us and hopefully share a different perspective. So I have my buddy Bernard James. He lives out in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He's jumping on with us tonight. Bernard's a guy that I first met, I think it was back in like 2016 or 17. But I got to work with him in a lot of youth stuff. He's an incredible filmmaker, which you'll hear some about that. He's also one of the funniest guys I've ever met. He's deceptive because he's kind of quiet sometimes. And like he'll be sitting there kind of silently, and then all of a sudden he'll like crack a super witty joke, and everybody's laughing. Like he's a fun guy to be around, but he also has an incredible heart. So I'm so excited tonight for you guys to hear this conversation with Bernard James. So check this out. Hey Bernard, welcome to Live from the Living Room. Thanks for jumping in tonight.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So obviously, our paths have crossed. We got to work together a little bit a couple years ago at some camp stuff and other district stuff out in Pennsylvania. But I know that 99.9% of people watching this right now probably don't know who you are. So who is Bernard James?
Oh my goodness. Who is Bernard James? So I guess, so I'm a filmmaker. I have a college degree in filmmaking. I actually just graduated last year. I love movies. As you can see, I'm a black man. I'm Jamaican American, actually. And interestingly enough, my family has actually only lived in the U.S. Less than 50 years.
Okay.
So I was raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which was like pretty close to where you were at. And actually, my city is predominantly occupied by African Americans and Latinos. I like making people laugh. I've been a Christian all my life, though probably didn't really, take it seriously and really take the call until in my teen years when I was a teen at youth camp, and that was probably when I really dedicated my life to the Lord. I've been volunteering in my church for 5 years now, and my church is actually predominantly white. And like I said, I've been going there my whole life, and so because of that, a lot of my close friends and a lot of like the people who I'd really call like my core group are white. But I'll get back more on that later.
Yeah. Well, and so speaking of being a filmmaker, if I remember correctly, I think recently you won one of your films won some award.
Yeah. So my senior thesis film, actually, it's been going on a pretty successful run in festivals. We've won so far 3 awards, 2 of which were the best in the competitions, and I won one for best director, which is pretty cool. Obviously, probably could have gone further, but because of this whole situation, it kind of got halted. But it is pretty cool to, see my work getting recognition, which is always amazing. But
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think my first introduction to you was actually getting to work with you on some video stuff. Well,
Yep.
More like me getting to watch you work because you were awesome and I was learning. Man, I love seeing where that's taken you. Well, so I wanted to bring you on tonight. I mean, because obviously, I mean, it's impossible to miss what's happening if you go on social media. Just the events of the last couple of weeks are kind of, I guess they're kind of blowing up right now, or whatever you want to say. But as I look at, like in my context, I mean, I'm out here where I think Cairo's 95% white. Our county is 93.3% white. And so for me and a lot of my students, like we're not really often confronted with blatant racism. And so like we see over the last couple of weeks, I mean, with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, like we see those things and it's almost like a shock to our system, maybe that even still exists in our country. So like from your perspective, how do you see these recent events?
Well, to be completely honest, and I don't mean to sound, like downtrodden or anything, but I'm kind of used to it, which is, it's sad to say. But I think, they happen so often. The last time a death like this really like hit me hard was the murder of Philando Castile back in 2016. And that was really just because of the circumstances, seeing how he literally did nothing and was gunned down. So I think that was the last time that it really hit me. And before that, probably Trayvon Martin, because that was when I was just coming to a point in my life where I was really starting to understand these issues on a national scale. And that one really hit me. But other than that, like, they're sad, but it never really sinks in. With this one that just happened with the murder of George Floyd, I would almost go so far as to say that I've almost been a bit disappointed that, it took this graphic, murder to finally, shake people up to what's been going on. However, I mean, I'm still grateful that a conversation is now taking place. But I will say that this one does seem different to me, from my perspective. It does feel different. But I do also think that there are contributing factors with the death of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor having taken place so recently.
Yeah.
And all of this happening against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
But, it's crazy times, but yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, yeah, I think just the mindset right now to go from COVID, which I mean, obviously it's still happening, but now into this, it does seem to be, like, I agree with you. I don't know if I could put it into words, but it does seem, something seems different about this one. I mean, from the widespread reaction, it's been cool to see people taking notice. But I mean, events like these, I mean, like you said, it's been since Philando Castile that it kind of really rocked you. It seems like every now and then there's one of these that pop up, but it's easy for us to be like, oh, well, this isn't as big of an issue, or to kind of just let it go. And you hear this term of systemic racism, which seems to be more subtle, which is why maybe we're just not noticing until these big events. Um, can you help us understand, like, what does systemic racism mean? What does it look like? And is like, how have you experienced that in your own life?
Yeah. So, first let me say it is quite a complicated thing, and it's unfortunately not as simple as I wish it could be. But I'll try to give the broad strokes just so I'm not here all day.
Yeah.
But basically, systemic or institutional racism, it's been in our country forever, So after the emancipation of slaves and after the Jim Crow era, a lot of people tend to think that um, racism came to an end in the 1960s. We had the civil rights movement and everything was great. MLK gave the I Have a Dream speech and everything was fine and we were all in unity. Mm-hmm. Not the case. See, the system has still been rigged in favor of those who are not black. So now this system, this racism shows itself in many forms, including wealth, economics, housing, criminal justice, employment, etc. And so a big contributing factor, what we saw was in the 1960s and 70s, you saw the majority of black people ending up in the same types of living spaces. You have what's called redlining. I won't get into that too much, but basically you have what's called like black areas, which have taken common terms as like ghettos, and I'm sure people have heard that term before. But you have many black families who for decades have been taking in lower incomes, all the while receiving less funding in education systems, which then leads to lesser education. And then on top of that, and this is where crime kind of comes into play. In the 1970s, we saw what was called the war on drugs, mm-hmm. right? And so a reason why that was such a big deal and such a hard-hitting thing is because you saw police presence rise in these areas where black people, predominantly live, and you saw a lot of families being torn apart, a lot of fathers being thrown in prison. The incarceration rate skyrocketed, in these times, and it was escalated in the 1980s, and unfortunately, it has had a huge effect on everything going forward. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I have stuff, but yeah. What else? What also comes from this idea of systemic racism is, I think, the hardest thing for people to grasp, but also the most important thing, is what's called implicit bias. Mm-hmm. Now, this is something that everybody has. Implicit bias is basically just subconscious stereotyping. We all do it, and that's the thing. Mm-hmm. In my own life, I didn't get to go to the best of schools. My middle school and high school are considered to be dangerous. I remember my parents didn't even want me to go there because they were afraid for my life going to these schools, But yeah, that thing of implicit bias plays into me as well. And that's what I think the majority of a lot of white people have problems grasping, is that they think it's just like, they see racism as this really explicit, like, terrible thing. So to be called racist is a horrible thing, whatever. They're like, I don't stereotype, and maybe they don't in a way, but we all have a mindset, and yeah, I had it too. I remember back when I was 14, I was robbed by two African Americans. Mm-hmm. And that really negatively affected my perception of black men. And I'm a black man, so it was just a really confusing thing, because I just felt like black men, depending on what they wore, what they, spoke like, or whatever, they were criminals or whatever. And that was the mindset I had. And that, unfortunately, that's kind of just a mindset that we all have. Now, there are plenty of contributing factors, entertainment, the way that we are portrayed in television and movies and everything like that, that all feeds into it. And it's not just Black people who are, victims to this, but we are affected most negatively, I believe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like a lot of times I tried to be white, quote unquote white, and you kind of get this idea of what that means, and it's like higher than being Black, which is a terrible thing, but yeah.
So I mean, so that's something that you've even almost like the perception of it as well, you've seen in your own life as you look at that. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, like I said, I mean, this is probably watching this video it's going to be a predominantly white audience. For us, and most of us are hopefully connected or are probably connected to the church as well. So for us as like the white brothers and sisters in Christ, like, is there something that you wish that we could understand about the experience of the Black community in America that might open our eyes to kind of see what's going on?
Yeah. So kind of like what I was saying before, this idea of implicit bias and implicit racism versus explicit. And so most people, like I said, hear the term racism and they align it with explicit racism, like lynching, using derogatory terms, or, just whatever racist behavior. You liken it to explicit. However, implicit is a thing too, and it is a form of racism that many people may experience. Now, that doesn't make you a bad person. Mm-hmm. It's not really the fault of people, because it's something that happens, that has occurred without them even realizing. So a lot of people, they hear that like, oh my goodness, I'm a racist, like it's terrible, and you know that you're not a bad person. Mm-hmm. And it's not only something that white people experience, as I just said. But yeah, know the difference between explicit and implicit racism, but also a lot of things they're probably hearing terms like white privilege, mm-hmm. or they're hearing the slogan Black Lives Matter being used. Mm-hmm. And now those things, they're not meant to discredit or downplay the struggle that so many white Americans have experienced. A lot of white people, they hear white privilege and they're completely, thrown up against it, because they're like, well, listen, I come from a low-income family. I've had to work hard my whole life. I haven't been handed anything. And, that may be true, and, that's great, but it still doesn't mean that, Black people are still a step back. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's what people don't realize. And so those terms really are not meant to downplay or put down anybody, but just to make it aware that this is a thing. This is a result of a 400-year-old system, mm-hmm. That has been against Black people from the beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Also know that there has been put forth an effort to reverse these things. And it doesn't just start when these killings happen. There are organizations and stuff like that who have been fighting against these things for years. They may not get as much airtime as, these tragedies, but they are happening. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's pretty much what I want.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said there, because I think for me, as I'm watching, especially over social media, it seems like for a lot of people, especially in the church world, they're almost fighting back, or they're struggling with this, because like you said, at first it's like, wait, you're saying like I have white privilege, or you're saying that I'm racist, or those things inside of me. Like nobody likes having a flaw pointed out. Like nobody likes feeling like they're in the wrong, or like they've done something wrong. But I love your perspective on that, of like understanding it's like, okay, like if you notice these things, it's not saying you're a bad person, but what are you going to do about it? And and so like for me, I think as I've watched the reactions of like a lot of my students on Tuesday, with that whole like the Blackout Tuesday movement, it was awesome to see a lot of students posting, and it's awesome to see a lot of church people and white Christians that are taking notice and that are willing to sit in that kind of uncomfortableness. And so you see them posting, you see them doing these things, but like I know for me, I still like, I mean, Tuesday I was feeling the weight of it throughout the week, and even like today preparing for this conversation, like I feel the weight of this situation, and it doesn't feel like just having a post on Facebook or Instagram is enough. So like, what does it look like for us to actually like step up and take a stand against racism? Like, what can we do?
So, yeah, there are many things you can do, and I think, yeah, what you were just saying is a good point. How sometimes posting on social media, like if it may feel good in the moment, but in the
Mhm.
long run, it's like, what did I really do? I feel the same way.
Mhm.
Um, but I think in this time, the best thing for people to do, people who are not of color, is to educate yourself
Mhm.
on the reality of institutional racism. And I
Mhm.
say that because, when you take a stance, you will very likely have to, defend it at some point against maybe family or someone in your neighborhood who just doesn't want to hear it, doesn't believe it. And in those times when, if you're educated, you can have like a good, dialogue, or
Mhm.
hopefully some kind of meaningful dialogue. And so, educate yourself on the reality of that, and realize that, this is something that affects everyone.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's an amazing documentary on Netflix. It's called 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment, and it goes into mass incarceration of Black people and everything. It's on Netflix. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. I just rewatched it a few weeks ago, and it's just incredibly powerful, but also very informative. And that's a good launch point, to then learn more. Um, but more than that, I think what people can do for themselves is, look at yourself in the mirror, do a self analysis, and realize that some of the things that you may be saying, some of the things that you may be, allowing friends to say or whatever, it might be endorsing this idea of implicit racism. Um, Even myself, I have to do that. I have to say, what am I saying or what am I thinking that is putting Black people down, you know? And so that is imperative that you do that. You kind of look at yourself, and you're able to say, maybe that thing that my friend said the other day, maybe that was kind of messed up. Maybe that was racist. Maybe that could, change the perception of a thing, Um, Also, I would say look into having a deeper understanding of Black culture. So, in our country, Black culture is one of the only things that a lot of people like about Black people, unfortunately, and it is shaped a lot of the culture. I think I'd be hard pressed to say that hip hop isn't like probably the biggest like genre of music, and it has been for the last like 20 years. And you look at all these things that originally came from Black people, and I would say don't just be a passive listener. Look into it. Look into the history of that stuff, and understand what people are saying in these lyrics and why they're saying them, and you know the stories they may be telling through these songs and whatever, these movies and whatnot. And having a deeper understanding of Black culture, I think, is a very important thing. If you have Black friends, reach out to them, and maybe don't unload and be like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that, but like maybe just say, I'm here for you. I think that can go a long way. The great thing about having salvation is knowing that we're all sinners, no matter what. No matter if it's racism or whatever, we all have fallen short of the glory of God, and we all need Jesus. And so I think that is a very humbling thing to remember that, and remember that if you have Jesus in your heart, it's a step in the right direction, and allowed you to work in you and to change your heart if you feel that needs to be done. But yeah.
Dang, preach. Oh man. Well, I love that you mentioned 13th, because I was gonna, just as you were talking, got thinking. I saw you had a post on Facebook the other day, and I know most people listening probably aren't a friend of yours on Facebook, but you had a post of even some other, I think, shows that might be on Netflix or other places, or movies. Do you mind sharing just a couple more that you would recommend, just to, again, to educate ourselves?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a movie guy,
Yeah.
but I guess thinking of Netflix, there's a series on there. It's the same person who made 13th, female actually, Ava
Yeah.
DuVernay, called When They See Us, and it's actually about a true event that happened in 1989, where four black kids and one Latino,
Mhm.
they were wrongfully convicted of a rape, and they were put in jail for I think 15 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And powerful, powerful. I mean, I honestly, I haven't. I know what happens because I read up on it, but like I haven't honestly seen past the second episode because it's been really hard just to
Mhm.
even like watch that. But like I know I need to at the same time.
Mhm.
So that's one. When They See Us. Some of the movies I mentioned, 12 Years a Slave.
Mhm.
That's more about the American slavery system, and it's very raw, visceral look. Also based on a true story, a man, his memoir, and how he was a free man who was kidnapped and sold into slavery.
Mhm.
I think that one is available to rent. I don't know that that's on a streaming platform.
Okay.
Uh, there's a film. I don't know if they've seen Black Panther, uh,
I would
but
assume that.
the director of Black Panther, the way he actually got famous, he made a film with Michael B. Jordan, the guy who plays Eric Killmonger,
Yep.
back in 2013, called Fruitvale Station.
Okay.
That's about the murder of Oscar Grant. He was killed by the police in 2009, I believe, in California. And that movie is really, really powerful. One of the, again, I mean, these aren't the easiest movies to watch and everything,
Mhm.
but I think it's important. So that's one. If you want one that just recently came out, Just Mercy,
Okay.
and I think that's actually free right now. If anybody wanted to jump on that, it's free right now to stream because they want to educate people on
Yeah.
these injustices. That one is also based on a true story. I would highly recommend that one as well.
Okay.
There's so many, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, dude, I mean, that's all the questions that I sent you. That's all I got. But do you have any last thoughts or comments before I let you go?
Uh, just everyone, in youth, take take in those moments, take in that time, with each other. It's great. I mean, it was the highlight of my life thus far. I so much of who I am came from, my youth group. And so really take that in and take those moments in because they will follow you into adulthood. And I'm seeing that now. The seeds that were sowed in me are now blossoming. So take it in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Bernard, thanks again for taking time to speak and to share your heart with us tonight. As you were watching and listening into that conversation, it might have been challenging. It might have been hard for you to hear some of that. It might have been uncomfortable even to think that, man, are we maybe part of the problem here? Are there maybe some biases that we're holding? And honestly, if you're like me, it's easy to feel helpless right now. It's easy to feel like you see this big problem and don't know what to do. But as Bernard said, man, like, educate yourself. This is a perspective. If you're growing up as a white male in America or as a white female in America, you can't fully understand the experiences and the perspective of the black community. But if we look in scripture, like, we see that God loves his creation. Like, we were all black, white, brown, whatever color of your skin, we were all created in God's image. And God loves his creation. And Jesus said to his disciples that like we will be known by the way we love each other. And so just because we live in a predominantly white community doesn't mean that we can turn a blind eye. It doesn't mean that we can pretend that this doesn't exist, because it does. As we heard tonight, this is a big problem. As we see in the headlines, as we see around the country right now, this is an issue. And honestly, it's even going global. People around the world are recognizing that this isn't right. And so if we claim to be a Christian and we try to turn a blind eye, if we claim to be a Christian and stay silent, we're missing the mark. So I want to challenge you, educate yourself. If you have a black friend, man, reach out to them. And as Bernard said, it doesn't have to be this big sappy thing, but just let him or her know that you're with them. But as Christians, we just can't afford to stay silent on this. As Christians, we can't afford to not show love to the hurting. That doesn't mean that you have to embrace everything that's going on. That doesn't mean that you have to be against the police. It doesn't mean that you have to demean yourself or devalue yourself, because the reality is we are all created in God's image. So let's do our part to live that out. Let's do our part to show love to our brothers and sisters in Christ. So guys, I want to challenge you. Let's not let this just be like a 1 week thing to where we have some nice posts on social media, or we have this video, maybe have a couple conversations this week. My challenge for you, and especially for myself, is to stay consistent with this. Because one social media post doesn't change the world. One conversation doesn't change the world, but it can be a starting point to a big change. But we have to change ourselves and make sure that we are loving our neighbor. We have to make sure that we are loving as Christ loved us. So my challenge for you this weekend as we go into our small groups is let's be open and honest. Let's recognize the bias in us. Let's recognize the sin that we may be carrying in our hearts without noticing it or without realizing it. But let's be honest with each other. Let's have conversations about this, and let's start to be the change. It's not going to happen overnight, but we can start now. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I hope to see you this week in a small group, and we'll see you next week for Live from the Living Room. See ya.